When my sister secured a high-paying job, everything seemed to shift. Suddenly, my mother expected me to quit my job and take on all the household duties. But I refused. I wasn't about to let anyone erase the hard choices I had already made. At just 25, I had already experienced so much loss. My father's sudden death 6 years ago, from a heart attack, was the turning point. I had to leave college in my second year to step into the role of caretaker for my family. My mom, who had always been a stay-at-home parent, had no job experience, and though she held a degree, it seemed useless in our situation. The thought of asking our relatives for help made me feel small, so I found a way forward on my own. Leaving school wasn't easy, but it felt like the right thing to do. I could have pushed through, balancing work and studies, but I couldn't leave my mom, at 46, to fend for herself, nor could I expect my 16-year-old sister to shoulder the burden. My father, who had been a manager at a store, had built up decent savings, but it wasn't enough to carry us forever. Thankfully, there was life insurance, but I knew that going back to school just wasn't realistic. So, I moved back home permanently, took a job, and became the breadwinner. I wasn't bitter, and I didn't regret the sacrifices I made. Yes, I let go of dreams of a better future, but I kept my faith. I believed that hard work would guide me to something more, somehow. But it wasn't without its battles. The grief was immense. Losing my father so suddenly, especially when we had been so close, was devastating. My sister, though, had always shared a stronger bond with my mother. For me, it felt like the one person who had been my world was now gone, and I was left to fill his place. Yet, this grief pushed me to step into his shoes, to honor him by doing what he would have done. And, in some way, I felt proud. I worked hard to provide for my family, doing everything I could to ensure my sister's education didn't suffer. I didn't want her to be held back by the same struggles I faced. She was brighter than me, and I believed she deserved the chance to shine. But what I didn't expect was how little gratitude I would receive. Despite all my sacrifices, I felt that neither my sister nor my mother truly appreciated what I had given up. My mother, particularly, seemed to have a never-ending victim complex. Even after I had taken on so much responsibility, she would complain about the lack of money and pressure me to do better. It was overwhelming. There were moments when I wanted to scream, asking her if she truly thought I was doing enough. Couldn't she see what I had already given? It would have been so easy for me to step away, to simply drop everything and focus on myself. Without my father, she couldn't find a job, and my sister was too young to manage everything alone. But I stayed. I made sure I was there for them. Still, it seemed like it wasn't enough for my mother. I was barely 21, without a degree, and with hardly any experience. How could she expect more from me? I found a receptionist job. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid enough for us to survive, as long as we were careful with our spending. We were lucky to own our home, so rent wasn't an issue, but the bills were always a concern. On top of everything, I set aside what I could for my sister's future, determined that she wouldn't be held back by our circumstances. I wanted her to go to college, to get ahead. In the early years after my father's death, my sister and I had a strong bond. We had to grow up fast, but we relied on each other. When my mom got too frustrated with our situation, my sister would stand up for me, shutting down her complaints before they could break me down. I didn't like confrontation, didn't want to add to the stress, so I kept quiet. But my sister always had my back. But something changed over time. As my sister started college, our dynamic shifted. We took out a student loan for her, something I would help pay off, of course. She was studying finance and would be able to support herself in the future. At least, that's what I hoped. Hadn't already carried the weight of the world on my shoulders for years. I was taken aback. Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. Was she serious? After everything I had done, after all the sacrifices I made, she was asking me to step into her shoes? To take over her duties, as though I hadn't already given up so much for this family? How could she ask me to abandon my career, my future, all because my sister was starting a new chapter? I could feel the tension rising in the room. My heart pounded in my chest, but I tried to keep my voice steady as I asked her why. Why now? She explained that with my sister's new job, she believed my income was no longer necessary, that I was free to take on the role of the homemaker, an expectation that left me stunned. I had been the one who worked so hard to provide for this family. I had sacrificed my own dreams to ensure my sister could pursue hers without the burden of our circumstances weighing her down. And now, it seemed like my mother wanted me to return to a life I had already left behind. Stay home, she suggested, as if it were the easiest thing in the world. But how could I? How could I let go of what I had fought for, what I had worked so tirelessly to build? I knew the house needed care. I knew my mother was aging, but had she forgotten that I had been the one to put my dreams on hold for years? She acted like it was a simple exchange, her role for mine. But it wasn't. It felt like another heavy weight, like the last straw in a long list of things that hadn't been acknowledged or appreciated. And what hurt the most was her complete disregard for my own achievements. She had never once congratulated me for getting to the point I was at now, successful, stable, and finally content. Instead, she just expected me to drop everything, to become the caregiver again, the homemaker. It felt suffocating. Did she really believe my life could just revolve around her needs, around making her comfortable, while mine would fade into the background? I couldn't hold back my frustration anymore. I tried to understand her, to hear her out, but inside I felt betrayed. Wasn't it enough that I had already sacrificed my education and career to hold us all together? And now, with my sister starting her own journey, my mother was asking me to once again put my own life on hold. How much more was I supposed to give? How many more pieces of myself was I expected to sacrifice? I didn't respond immediately, my mind racing with questions, emotions. All I could think was that my mother had no idea what it meant to have given up everything for this family. She didn't understand the pain of watching someone you love change and drift away while you remain stuck, still carrying the weight of it all. I had never expected this from her. I had hoped that, after everything, she would finally see me as someone who had earned the right to live for herself, to have a future, not just a past full of sacrifices. But now it seemed like all I was expected to be was the dutiful daughter who lived to make everyone else's life easier. And that's when the anger really started to build inside me. Was I being selfish? Or was I finally standing up for the life I had fought so hard to create? I didn't know where this conversation would take me, but I knew one thing for sure, I wasn't going to let her dictate my future. It had always been this way. I carried my own weight, even in the chaos of daily life. No matter how hectic my job became, I made sure to contribute, balancing both work and household chores. It was never easy, but it was the least I could do for my sister. After all, she had been living with us for weeks, yet she was exempt from chores, and we had no complaints. We understood she would be leaving soon, so it felt right to let her rest a little. But everything else was always shared equally between us. I always ensured she didn't overexert herself. It was, I thought, the bare minimum I could ask for, considering she didn't contribute financially. I didn't hold it against her, at least, I tried not to. But what she said to me one day, that was a different matter altogether. I was shocked. Her words stung like nothing else. I'd always made an effort to be kind, but in return, I felt a slap in the face. I told her firmly that I was going to continue working. I didn't want to rely on anyone, not even family, for money. Independence was key for me. But my mother, oh, she didn't let it go. Out of respect for me, she kept her opinions to herself when my sister was around, but the minute my sister left the room, she would find ways to pressurize me. She tried to guilt-trip me, reminding me that I could be helping more at home now that she was getting older. But I couldn't understand why she said that. She wasn't old. At least, not in my eyes. Sure, she wasn't getting any younger, but there wasn't any major health issue that would warrant her acting as if the world was about to end. I kept my silence, ignoring her when I could, but honestly, it was driving me mad. Staying there with her was becoming harder and harder, and I reached a breaking point. It wasn't just about the housework anymore, it was about the emotional toll she was taking on me. Every day felt like a battle. A battle I didn't want to fight anymore. So, I made up my mind. The moment my sister left for her trip, I would leave too. No hesitation. No second guessing. That day came sooner than expected. My sister packed her bags and left, and with her departure, I finally felt free. I didn't even bother saying goodbye to my mother. I didn't owe her that. She could keep calling and texting all she wanted, but I wasn't about to give her the satisfaction of knowing where I went. I needed space. I had already made arrangements to stay with a friend, just for the time being, until I figured out what came next. I didn't know if I wanted to go back or look for a new place to live. The uncertainty was terrifying, but what choice did I have? Then came the shocking news. My sister wasn't just going on a trip. She wasn't coming back. She had lied to all of us. The trip she'd claimed was temporary? It wasn't. The job she'd accepted wasn't even in the same city. She had known about it all along. This wasn't some spur-of-the-moment decision. She chose to leave without telling anyone, believing we'd try to stop her. I could almost understand why she thought that, especially with my mother's tendency to cling to her. But I would have been nothing but supportive. In fact, I would have encouraged her to go, to seize the opportunity. She wrote it all down in an email, bluntly telling us that she had no intention of staying in touch. That was the worst part. Her words, cold and final. She said she wanted to start fresh, to leave behind everything from the past. Including us. Our family, she claimed, reminded her of all the bad moments in her life. I was devastated. To hear her say that, to think that she would throw away everything we'd done for her, it was beyond hurtful. It felt like everything I had sacrificed, every bit of effort I'd put in, meant nothing. I had worked hard, I had given up so much for her, and now she didn't even want to remember it. To her, we were just a chapter she wanted to erase. I read her email over and over, the words searing into me, but over the years, I'd grown used to disappointment from her. The things she said didn't surprise me as much as they should have. I had known it deep down, as soon as she could stand on her own, she would cut us off. And that's exactly what she did. What really surprised me, though, was how my mother reacted. She took it hard. Very hard. I couldn't understand why she was so upset. After all, my sister had treated us both the same way. But still, there she was, calling me, her voice shaky, heartbroken. I almost didn't want to answer, but curiosity got the better of me. When I picked up, she didn't apologize, didn't try to make things right with me. Instead, she started complaining about how ungrateful my sister was, how disappointed she was in her. I let her talk, but I didn't say anything. I thought maybe, just maybe, she would apologize for what she had put me through. But no! She went on about how my sister had let her down, and towards the end of the conversation, she dropped the bombshell. Now that my sister was gone, she wanted me to come back. She said I was her only option. I was her support, the one she could rely on. That statement crushed me. She had just been pressuring me to quit my job, and now she expected me to come crawling back? I couldn't believe it. I had had enough. And so, I said it. I told her, you can find someone else to support you. I had reached my breaking point. I was exhausted, drained from a life that had been one sacrifice after another. It was clear now that no matter what I did, it never felt like enough. I had always been the one to put my family's needs before my own, always the one to clean up the messes they created. But not anymore. When I made that call, I thought it would be my final act of defiance. I told her exactly what I had been thinking for so long. I was done. Done living for them. Done sacrificing my own happiness to keep things together. I reminded her, bluntly, that she was the one who had pushed me away, not the other way around. She had distanced herself from me, so why should I be the one to carry the weight of her guilt now? I needed to live for myself. I needed to find my own path, without constantly being tethered to the past. And with that, I hung up the phone, blocking her. The silence that followed felt like a weight lifted off my chest, but it didn't last long. A few days later, the attempt started. First, she called from a new number, then she had her friends reach out. But it wasn't enough to sway me. She wasn't apologizing, no, she was trying to manipulate me. She spun this story that she had no one else to rely on, that we were her only hope, and as her daughter, I should care for her the way she cared for me when I was a child. It was guilt, pure and simple. They tried everything. But I wasn't moved. I wasn't going back until she apologized. I had made up my mind. And yet, they still insisted I was being harsh. She was just looking out for you, they said. She only wanted what was best. It was a constant reminder of the choices they expected me to make, as if my feelings didn't matter. My mother thought maybe I didn't enjoy working, and that was why she suggested I quit my job to stay home. But she never even bothered to ask me. If she had, I would have made it clear I had no intention of quitting my job. I loved it. But she didn't stop pushing, didn't listen, and now, with my sister gone, she thought I had no other option but to give in. I felt the weight of the situation, of my family's expectations, but my anger still burned bright. I couldn't help but feel like I had done enough, and now it was time for me to do something for myself, without the endless guilt trips. I know it sounds harsh, but I wasn't going to play the role of the dutiful daughter anymore. What my mother did wasn't right. And no matter how guilty it made me feel, I couldn't let that dictate my life any longer. The response to my decision was overwhelming. Most people seemed to agree with what I had done, and for that, I was grateful. But the reality of the situation hadn't settled. My mother didn't have the means to support herself. She didn't have savings to fall back on. The little that was left from our father's estate had already been spent. I was the only one left who could help her financially. So, I made another decision. I would send her money, enough to get by. But that was all I could give. I couldn't live with her anymore, and I wasn't going to be part of her manipulation. I couldn't abandon her entirely, though. I wasn't that cold. But I was done with the constant sacrifice. I started looking for my own place, separately. A place where I could breathe, where I could finally have some space to myself. A week later, after agonizing over everything, I finally worked up the courage to speak to my mother face to face. It wasn't easy, and I knew she would be upset. But I needed to let her know where I stood. When I walked in, she was so happy to see me, until she saw that I wasn't carrying any bags. The realization hit her, and her expression shifted. She knew I wasn't coming back. I sat her down, and despite the tightness in my chest, I explained. I told her that she was healthy and strong, that she wasn't as old as she thought. I reassured her that I would still be nearby, just a cab ride away if she ever needed me. But I needed to live my own life. She seemed devastated, but she didn't argue. She accepted it, though it was clear how much it hurt her. I could see it in her eyes. At that moment, I made a decision. I was going to find my own place, away from the heavy weight of her expectations. My friend and I started looking at apartments, and the excitement I felt was overwhelming. This was my life now, and I couldn't wait to start living it. A month later, I had moved into my new apartment. It was small, but it was mine. And that was everything. The view was beautiful, the price was right, and most importantly, I had my own space. No more sharing, no more guilt. Just freedom. My friends helped me move in, and the idea of hosting a housewarming party was so exciting. I wanted to share my joy, my new beginning. I even invited my mother, though I wasn't sure how things would go. I hadn't spoken to my sister in a while, but when she found out I had moved out, she reached out to congratulate me. It felt distant, like a hollow gesture, but I thanked her and let it go. There was no need to dwell on it. She was who she was, and nothing was going to change that now. And then, the housewarming. The night was a blur of laughter and games, music, and conversations that didn't revolve around family drama. It was a release, a celebration of something I had worked so hard to create. My mother came, but only for a short while. She seemed fine enough, but after dinner, she left with her friends. The night was just beginning for me. The energy was electric as we continued the party, joking around, playing games, and simply being free. I won't forget that night. Not ever. It was the start of something new, something I had fought for. I wasn't just surviving anymore, I was living.